also here. I know that you have been going through the paperwork. So this is interesting because I've only kind of gotten to the page number 8 on this. And so I didn't see that other element that perhaps someone's going to have to step aside, if perhaps Nathan Wade, because the public appearance also is important here.
Right, yeah, so it's on page 17, the bottom of page 17. I was looking for it myself. So we can just read it here if you want. The district attorney may choose to step aside along with whole of her office and refer the prosecution to the prosecuting attorney's counsel, which would reassign that matter. Or alternatively, she says the special prosecutor, Nathan Wade, can withdraw, and this is a key quote, allowing the district attorney, the defendants, and the public to move forward without present or remuneration, distracting from and potentially compromising the merits of this case. So the distraction and the potential for compromising is what the judge here is saying is the most important thing, and that's why he's offering this binary choice to the prosecutors.
This is interesting because we know that Fani Willis actually offered the job to someone else before Nathan Wade. That person turned it down. It wasn't so easy to find someone to take this job. Do we have any indication how long Willis might have to make a decision?
So the judge does not actually say this in the order. What we do know is that there are obviously pending motions before the judge that have to do with this case and other defendants, and so likely there will have to be a choice to be made before the case moves forward. We're not sure exactly what the timing is and what this means for the calendar of this very complex case, but right now the district attorney and her special prosecutor have this choice that they have to make.
Okay, let me sort of bounce back to Katrina now. I'm going to try and bounce between the two of you because I know both of you guys are going through the paperwork here. Katrina, what I'm going to ask you to do, because, you know, we here have been sitting and watching hours of this case, but I want you to kind of remind us of the arguments on both sides, what the prosecutions were suggesting and how Fani Willis was defending herself.
Sure, there is so much that happened at these hearings, but to distill it a bit, basically, Fani Willis was accused by one of the defendants, Michael Roman, in the Fulton County case, of having a romantic relationship with Nathan Wade, a special prosecutor that she had hired. Judge McAfee ended up holding a series of hearings about that, where it came out that, in fact, they had this romantic relationship, but the real issue is that they were saying that she financially benefited from it. Wade and she went on numerous trips together. They were saying that he paid for these trips with money that he was receiving from the state, and so they both had a vested financial interest in moving this case forward, in prosecuting a higher number of defendants. And that is really a big issue here, because it meant that she might have a personal stake in this prosecution that they said created a real conflict of interest. Now, on Fani Willis's side, they ended up admitting that there was, in fact, a romantic relationship that ended last summer, but they say she had no financial stake here, that actually, when she went on these trips with Nathan Wade, she always paid him back. She paid him back in cash, which became a sticking point at the trial that they debated quite a bit over, but that there was no actual conflict of interest here that impacted the prosecution of this case or the charges or anything about it.
Yeah, part of what she was sort of arguing was that, you know, when we went on these trips, maybe I would pay for the tickets and he would pay for the hotel, or maybe he would pay for a good chunk of it, but I would reimburse him in cash because I kept a lot of cash in my house because my dad always told me I should keep cash in my house, which certainly seemed a little odd. And the court kind of recognizes that. And, you know, the judge writes, such reimbursement practices may be unusual, and the lack of any documentary corroboration understandably concerning, yet the testimony withstood direct contradiction, was corroborated by other evidence. So, I mean, the judge essentially believed her, but still suggested that that may not be enough.
Basically, this just created a shroud over this case. And one moment that I really remember was when Fani Willis was on the stand and she said to, I think it was maybe Ashley Merchant, the defendant that accused her as attorney, you know, you seem to think that I'm on trial. I'm not on trial. Your clients are on trial for election interference. But basically, this whole soap opera has been in the media. It's been in the public eye, and it could potentially influence the jury pool.
All right, stand by, Katrina and Rob, because Jessica Levinson is joining us now. Jessica, it's really good to see you. Before I sort of dig into specific questions, I just want to get kind of your overview. Is this what you expected the outcome to be?
This is about what I expected. I did not think that he would find an actual conflict of interest, but there was enough discussion during the hearings where he asked a couple of times, but isn't an apparent conflict of interest a problem, that I thought we could potentially go there? If it's okay, I think for me, this is the crux of the decision where he says the appearance standard recognizes that even when no actual conflict of interest exists, or perceived conflict in the reasonable eyes of the public threatens confidence in the legal system itself. And to me, that's what this entire ruling is about. It's saying, I will not preside over a case where the legitimacy of the case is in question. And he has given the district attorney, a decision here. He said specifically in the ruling, this is a judicially crafted remedy. It's not clear exactly what has to happen in the case of an appearance, but I think this is one that makes sense. He's saying one of you needs to step aside because having both of you on this case will threaten the administration of justice. And he has some great language here about even when an attorney is guiltless in the actual sense, and I think that's important for the public to see, nevertheless is required to stand aside for the sake of public confidence. This is all about ensuring that when we look at this case and we look at how and when it proceeds to trial, that we feel confident in the process.
I wonder, though, if in saying that, I do not believe a conflict of interest was proven here, yet I do suggest that somebody step aside. It's almost reinforcing the assumption that people could perceive this as tainted in some way.
It's a great question. I mean, my initial response is when I teach in other areas of the law, for instance, when I think about campaign finance law and corruption, the law often recognizes even when there's no there, we want to use a belt and suspenders approach. So there isn't the actual conflict, but we want people to feel, in that case, confident about our election systems. And so we're willing to, I think to your question, have the kind of potential harm of people thinking, well, then why does there have to be a disqualification if there's no actual harm? We're willing to deal with that because we think the greater harm is leaving questions in the minds of the public. I will say the fact that the hearings happened, those questions are already there. So I think in the administration of justice, for public confidence, understanding that the legitimacy of the judiciary is under assault and under question, in my mind, this was the safer route.
Interesting. So, you know, what we have seen a lot with attorneys for the former president and the others is, you know, often there is an appeal, there is something to sort of drag things out. In a case like this, which I haven't seen anything like this before, but I'm not a legal person. Is there wiggle room? I mean, could we see the attorneys for the other defendants say, well, you know, what about this? Could they come back with some sort of appeal insisting that there is cause to have Fani Willis removed?
I will say never in the sense that could there be a defense attorney who's looking at this 23-page ruling and says, you know what, I think actually there is an actual conflict and it's worth going up to the appellate court? Maybe, but let's remember that what Judge McAfee did here is make a number of factual conclusions, and those are entitled to deference almost always when it comes to an appellate review. The appellate court is supposed to correct legal errors, but when it comes to the fact finder, that's Judge McAfee, the appellate court is supposed to acknowledge we weren't the ones in the room. We weren't the ones actually overseeing that hearing. So my guess, and it's difficult to put myself in the minds of those defense attorneys, of all defense attorneys in this case, is to say that this is a win for them, that it's a win to, and this is to your previous question, it's a win to have a judge say, we need to make a change. It's either the district attorney or it's the special counsel. And you bet that the defense attorneys are going to bring this up. to the extent that they're allowed by the judge over and over again in a jury trial.
Interesting. All right, Jessica, you stand by. I'm going to bring in congressional correspondent Scott McFarland. So, Scott, what are the chances that we could see the Fulton County case move forward before the election at this point? Because someone's got to step down. We already know that it was difficult for the district attorney to find someone to do the job that Nathan Wade agreed to do. And if you look at the documents here from the court, the suggestion is he's working for a lower wage than most attorneys in at Atlanta would. So it may take a while for her to find a replacement if that's the decision that she chooses.
There seems to be this sense, Anne-Marie, this was an efficient ruling by Judge McAfee. But look at all the time that's been burnt on the arguments over this singular issue raised by one of Donald Trump's co-defendants in the case. And look at all the time that's expiring in the courthouse in Florida, in New York, and here in Washington, D.C. Each of these 4 criminal cases against Donald Trump has had some number of delays or time schedules that have been altered by pre-trial challenges. This one was effective in slowing things down, just as the challenges in Washington, D.C. have been successful in slowing things down. And in New York, yesterday, even the district attorney agreed to push back the trial as much as a month into April at the earliest. Donald Trump is now the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. There's a narrowing window until the general election, and all these legal cases, all the legal jeopardy in which he finds himself, is being stretched out. It seems increasingly unlikely that case in Georgia, the case here in Washington, or the case in Florida gets near a trial for the election.
But how likely is it that if he hasn't put a post on X or Truth Social or anything yet, he's probably going to? How likely is it that this ruling will somehow sort of weave its way into the former president's campaign?
Well, he's been weaving the legal cases into his political strategy from the jump. It's become synthesized into the same thing. He was in the courthouse in Florida yesterday for a hearing in the federal classified documents case. He wasn't on the campaign stump. He made it a point of being in the courtroom for an appeals court argument here in Washington, D.C., when his presence was not required. So if he's blending these legal challenges with a political strategy, potentially effectively, I would think the statement from Donald Trump on this is imminent, if not likely.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, because I thought to myself, as all these legal challenges get pushed along the calendar, he's actually losing opportunities to get in front of the camera and plead his case on many levels. And so when he showed up in court when he really didn't need to, I thought he's going to take full advantage of any opportunity to make an appearance. I'm going to pivot over to Scott. I don't know if you can still hang out with us or if you got stuff to do, but I'm going to pivot over back to Jessica, because Jessica, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of this case because it's happening on the state level. I don't think we've really sort of visited that yet. A lot of these other cases that the president is dealing with, whether it's about January 6th or it's about the classified documents, or federal cases. But this is happening at the state level in Georgia. If he was to win the election in November, and this case is still dragging on, I mean, do we have any idea what that looks like for a sitting president?
Well, we don't. We've never been here before, and my sense is that that's a good thing. We've never had to be here before, but I would say I don't know that this case would continue. I know this is a state case, and so the big difference to your question is that as President of the United States, as head of one of the federal branches, he cannot say to his attorney general, now go to court and ask to dismiss this state case. He can for the federal cases. He can't, if he's convicted, attempt to self-pardon, because again, this is a state case and it's just up to a governor to provide clemency or a pardon. But what I would say is the reason I don't think that we would see an ongoing state criminal trial if the former president does win is because I think his team will make an argument that it violates the separation of powers and that it's improper for the state executive, for the district attorney to move forward on this criminal case while he is the sitting chief executive, that it will interfere with his constitutional duty to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, to quote the Constitution. Now, that doesn't leave us an answer for what would happen between November and January if he wins the election. But I do want to caution people, just because this is a state case, it doesn't mean full steam ahead. There's nothing that he can do to prevent it. I think we will see new arguments dealing with different constitutional concerns, structural concerns about the separation of powers and separate sovereigns.
And prior to this, we saw a couple of co-defendants, at least two, maybe three, actually plead guilty. And at the time, we wondered whether or not this was sort of the beginning of the dominoes falling or not. But I assume that this case kind of slowed that down. Do you expect that now we're going to see, the rest of the defendants start to figure out their own personal strategy, whether it means pleading guilty or testifying or whatever it is?
Absolutely. A lot of the people are going to go to it's a great question, going to go to the district attorney and say, once this case really continues, what's my deal? Is there a deal here? And what can I do to avoid jail time if that's possible? We have seen that. Let's remember, this disqualification question has nothing to do with the strength of the underlying case. Mm-hmm. And we have seen that people have pled guilty, and that this, frankly, I think is a strong case. And for a lot of legal watchers, this was arguably the strongest case maybe 6 months ago. Obviously, a lot has happened. Nobody anticipated this disqualification motion and all of the appearance issues that came along with it. But absolutely, the case is going to continue, and defendants are going to want to continue to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm. Let me see. I want to know, who else do we have kind of standing by? Katrina, Robert, is Scott still there? Scott's gone. Okay. All right. So we've been covering some breaking news since kind of the beginning of the hour. It said Fani Willis will remain on the case, the election interference case in Georgia. Really interesting decision by the judge, because though she's going to remain on the case, the judge has already suggested that the fact that there were questions means that this entire case may be called into question by the public. It's about appearances. And so even though the judge concluded that there was not a conflict of interest, he is suggesting that either Fani Willis or Nathan Wade step away. And that means we don't know how long that's going to take and what implications that's going to have on this case. We are going to bring back Katrina Kaufman now. And I think Rob Laguerre as well is there. Okay, guys, you've had kind of a little more time to dig into the documents. I don't know, Rob, Katrina, anything that kind of stood out to you?
Things that are standing out to me. I mean, one is that the judge is not saying that he condones this type of behavior. He says this finding is by no means an indication that the court condones this tremendous lapse in judgment or the unprofessional manner of the district attorney's testimony during the hearing, but that Georgia law doesn't permit finding an actual conflict for simply making bad choices. But ultimately, he says that, dismissing the indictment is just not the appropriate remedy here to dissipate the financial cloud of impropriety and potential untruthfulness found. Nor is disqualification of a constitutional officer necessary when a less drastic and sufficiently remedial option is available, which is to have one of these two parties leave the case. And I think really this is the best ruling possible. It was quite clear that someone had to step away for this to move forward. I think it will likely be Nathan Wade.
It would make the most sense, I imagine, if it's Fani Willis, then this whole case is going to really be put on hold for a while. But then I'll ask you, Robert, I mean, can the case continue without a Nathan Wade replacement, or are they going to have to, or do things grind to a halt until someone's willing to take this job?
Well, that's the million-dollar question at this point, right? We are not totally sure what's going to happen with the prosecution team. We can see through this order the two choices that the judge has given the office, and so it's clear that one is likely more preferable to the DA than the other. She will likely take that option, and then what happens next is kind of a wait-and-see posture now. But what's interesting as well, just to join Katrina in her analysis, the judge did make a point to say that the charges that were brought were not the result of this improper relationship. And so I think that that's something also to underscore here. He is saying that, you know, this relationship did not factor in the decision to seek the indictment, but this isn't going to be the only challenge to this indictment. We should expect motions to dismiss this case on numerous counts. And we already saw a few days ago, 6 counts were dismissed by the same judge. And so there are many legal challenges to this that lay ahead. And this is not now going to be a full steam ahead, let's get to trial. We should expect other, you know, impediments thrown in the DA's way as she tries to get to trial.
Yeah, that's a good reminder because that was the most recent update on this case. Vlad is here.
Hey, so the news just broke as I was coming from the 1515 studio of CBS Mornings to our studio here at West 57th Street. And if you're just joining us the same way that I'm joining the broadcast, the breaking news, of course, is that the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, Fani Willis, can remain on the Trump Georgia election interference case. But there's a choice that she has to make. So I want to go back to Jessica Levinson, and I apologize, Anne Marie, if you've already covered this, but
Jessica,
okay.
what were you going to ask? Because maybe Katrina or
Robert, maybe you can answer this, Katrina. So it strikes me that what the judge is saying is that Fani Willis does have to make a choice. She has to remove Mr. Wade from the entire process because even though the judge, and we have to be clear about this, the judge did not find any evidence of impropriety, but there is perhaps an illusion, an appearance of impropriety. So to me and to anybody who's watching this, Katrina, who's not a lawyer, isn't it kind of a slam dunk that she just jettisons him?
Yeah, I was just saying that before you entered, that seems, no problem. But that seems like the absolute clear choice here for Fani Willis to move ahead with the rest of the prosecution team. Nathan Wade can step aside. We have to see whether she needs to replace him before they can move forward or if they can kind of keep moving ahead and find someone to take on this job, although it is a really big job. We had reported previously that she went to 2 other people before Nathan Wade who turned this down because they didn't want the scrutiny involved in a case like this, the types of threats that you received, and to live their life after being on this type of case.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, as part of the decision here, it points that out, that she had offered the job to former Governor Roy Barnes, who declined, that the contract allows for $250 an hour rate, which is apparently quite low for a Metro Atlanta attorney, but also there's a cap on the number of hours you can work a week. So, I mean, this is not the kind of job that you get rich on, and I think that that was sort of part of what both of them were arguing, that, you know, that there's even if there was a mixing of the money, because the suggestion was in kind of this roundabout way, because they had been dating and he was working, the allegation is he was working for her, then the money that he spent on dates was benefiting her, so she was benefiting from the public funds that she was paying him. Really, really sort of roundabout. But, you know, they were sort of arguing, not only was that not the case, this isn't really the kind of job that high-profile lawyers are scrambling to get on because it's not going to make you rich.
Right. And the other question, too, that I have, Katrina, is that the court found that the court was unable to place any stock in the testimony of Terrence Bradley. Remind our viewers who Mr. Bradley is.
Sure, that stood out to me as well. Terrence Bradley was a former business partner of Nathan Wade, and he had also been his attorney in his divorce for a while, and the defense had viewed him as their star witness. He apparently had actually, I believe, tipped them off to the relationship and had previously said that the relationship started before Wade was hired for this trial. Now, on the stand, both Nathan Wade and Fani Willis testified that their relationship started after he'd been hired. And even in the ruling, the judge admits that the timeline of the relationship is still questionable, but he still didn't find it to be enough to create a conflict of interest that would end this case or take Fani Willis off of it completely without removing Nathan Wade, according to his decision.
All right, I think we have Jessica Levinson back. And Jessica, for people that are just joining us, the news is that Fani Willis will be able to remain on the case. Well, actually, the news is that no conflict of interest was found between Fani Willis and Nathan Wade in the election interference case against Donald Trump and a number of other defendants. However, the appearance may be enough. and enough that one of the two, Fani Willis or Nathan Wade, should be leaving this case. And so when we were talking a little bit earlier, Jessica, what I thought to myself as you were sort of explaining this is there's the law, and then this other part seems like the art. You know, like it's the art of now it's beyond sort of black and white, right and wrong, what the evidence proves. It's about, are we going to ensure that people have faith in the system?
Right.
Well, actually, I think that is part of the law. So I had the opportunity to work for a federal judge. I know very little bit about the federal conflict of interest rules. Obviously, here we're talking about Georgia state. But what we can see throughout conflict of interest rules, even for members of the government who aren't in the judiciary, is that there's an acknowledgement in the black letter of the law that appearance matters, that we have to have confidence in those who seek to represent us. And we have to have confidence in those presiding over cases, not just one of the most important criminal cases that, frankly, our nation has ever seen, but in everyday cases. Because if we don't have that confidence, then as Judge McAfee's ruling says, and he cites, I think, to the Federalist Papers, he goes way back to the beginning. He says, if we don't have that confidence, then the weakest branch suffers, meaning this is a branch that depends on our respect. This is a branch that lives and dies and on us thinking that it is legitimate. And what we see throughout this ruling, as we have more time to go through it, is that this really is a condemnation of actions that Fani Willis took. And he's basically saying it's not enough here for an actual conflict of interest, but he thinks under the law, and I would say actually, in my view, this is more than the art. This is still, he thinks he is required to say, one of these two people has to go. And one of the lines that jumped out at me is he said, an odor of mendacity remains, meaning we have to do something before this case can proceed. I think that I'm thinking back to James Comey saying, we're not going to press criminal charges against Hillary Clinton, but this was deeply negligent. It still does feel like a strong rebuke from Judge McAfee saying, you shouldn't have done this. And therefore, you need to go or Nathan Wade needs to go.
But the other thing that sort of is interesting to me, Jessica and Katrina and Robert, is we did get a statement here, and I don't know if you've read this already, Anne-Marie, but we did get a statement from former President Trump's lawyer, Steve Sadow.
No,
this came to us. Did you get to
No,
that?
go ahead.
So this comes to us from Olivia Rinaldi, who follows the Trump campaign. And here's what the statement says. I want everybody to hear it. While respecting the court's decision, we believe that the court did not afford appropriate significance to the prosecutorial misconduct of Willis and Wade, including the financial benefits, testifying untruthfully about when their personal relationship began, as well as Willis's extrajudicial MLK quote-unquote church speech, where she played the race card and falsely accused the defendants and their counsel of racism. We will use all legal options available as we continue to fight to end this case, which should have never been bought in the first place, which that last line sounds like somebody we know. And the grievance that they seem to have about everything when it comes to legal cases against them. But, it's interesting to me, Jessica, that they're pointing out that one of the things that they take umbrage to is Fani Willis's MLK speech, which she simply was explaining that as a black woman of color in her position, she would always be consistently attacked, her judgment and her motives constantly under attack. I think if you are a black woman in America watching this, you don't take umbrage to that. You say that's just sort of the norm for a lot of women in this country. And then you add on the layer of being a black woman, and this is sort of oftentimes for many par for the course. But why are they choosing to put that in their statement when it really was not part of what the judge was deciding?
Well, because I think this is part of their strategy, and they have, in fact, called Letitia James, the Black Attorney General in New York, Fani Willis, the Black District Attorney in Fulton County. They have accused them of racism. And so in my mind, this is part of an overall strategy to try and undermine the legitimacy of these charges. I think, again, it's worth noting that nowhere does Judge McAfee, because he shouldn't, and it would be wildly inappropriate, say this case should not have been brought. There's a question about the underlying claims of the case. this is not about Donald Trump's behavior. This is about the behavior of the prosecutor, who we can have a lengthy discussion about the level of scrutiny that she is under. This is an incredibly high-profile case. There's really no way of overemphasizing that. And we do know that people in our society, some people bear a much harder burden of scrutiny than others. But this has nothing to do with what Donald Trump did on the days leading up to January 6th. This is all about ensuring that when the jury looks at what Donald Trump did and failed to do, that they can look at that with clear eyes and not have questions about why this case was brought.
Such an excellent point. Jessica Levinson, Katrina Kaufman, Robert Laguerre, stand by because there's a lot more to come. If you're just joining us here on CBS News, we're following breaking news. A Georgia judge has ruled that Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis can stay on former President Trump's election interference case, but she does have a choice to make. The judge tells Willis if she stays, Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade must go. Wade is the man with whom she had a personal relationship with. Joining us now is CBS News. No.
I think we're going to take a bit.
All right, so joining us now is CBS News Justice. Scroll that back, please.
Okay.
All right, we've got Jessica, we've got Katrina. They've been standing by the entire time with us, but now we're going to bring in congressional correspondent Nicole Killian.
All right, thanks so much, Vlad and Anne Marie. I am joined by Scott Krupman, who is a former counsel for Kenneth Chesborough, who pled guilty in this 2020 election interference case. I want to get your reaction to Judge McAfee's ruling today.
I'm personally disappointed. I disagree with it. I found it interesting that Judge McAfee made pretty clear, I think, that he thought Fani Willis was lying on the stand, that he thought Nathan Wade was likely lying on the stand, that he thought Nathan Wade's former law partner was likely lying on the stand. And then yet at the end of the day, he said in order to purge all of these issues, all that needs to happen is that Mr. Wade step aside. Let me ask you, if you were being charged with a crime that could land you in prison for 10 plus years, would you feel under these circumstances that you were being given a fair shake? Probably not. And if that's the answer, it doesn't matter who the defendant is. Donald Trump, whoever else. Due process is due process. I personally don't feel this is consistent with due process. I personally feel like the entire office should have been disqualified.
I mean, in the case of the former president and his legal team, we did hear from them, Stephen Sadow, who says that while he respects the court's decision, he does say that we will use all legal options. I mean, do you think they should appeal?
Absolutely. So there's something in the Georgia system called interlocutory appeals, which allow under certain circumstances for a defendant to appeal an issue in the middle of a case as opposed to waiting till the very end. Now, Judge McAfee likely has to give them permission to do so, so they're going to have to ask Judge McAfee to do that. I think he'll probably be inclined to give permission to them, and absolutely, I think that the lawyers will probably be filing a notice of appeal. I certainly would, and it'll be a very interesting issue for the Court of Appeals to take up.
I know you said you don't necessarily agree with the judge's ruling, but at the same time, you know, he was critical of the district attorney and Nathan Wade for that matter. So what do you make of that?
Well, you know, judges have been critical of Fani Willis before. If you remember, Fani Willis was disqualified as to one of the potential defendants, Burt Jones, who's now our lieutenant governor, because she decided to go do a political fundraiser for his political opponent. So Fani Willis, in my opinion, has continued to show at minimum horrible judgment. And yeah, the judge has now called her out on it, but so what?
I mean, do you see this as a slap on the wrist?
It's not even a slap on the wrist. You know, it's a rub on the finger, whatever the analogy is. It's not, I don't think she's going to care whatsoever, because here's the thing. If you're okay as the elected district attorney with going into court, taking an oath to tell the truth, and then perjuring yourself, you're not really going to care at the end of the day if the judge gives you, let's call it a little slap on the wrist. She's going to, I guarantee you, declare this or think this as a victory. And if I were her, I would as well.
I mean, in terms of your involvement with the district attorney's office, Did you personally witness or hear any rumblings about this relationship that they had?
All I'll say is it's something that Ashley Merchant, who is an incredible lawyer, has been working on for a long time, and she was very careful not to release this, not to raise it until she had her ducks in a row and the evidence all tightened up. So yes, there were rumblings throughout the time, but it was just rumblings, rumors, innuendos. It wasn't until after I got out of the case that it really became to be concrete with evidence to support it.
I mean, at this stage of the game, obviously your client has pled guilty, but in hindsight, do you think maybe he should have waited to see how this particular situation plays out?
I don't. Look, unfortunately with criminal defense, this is always an issue. You plead guilty early, you usually get the best deal. But if you plead guilty early and then something happens in the case later, you don't get the advantage of that. It's always a balancing act. I can't speak for Mr. Chesborough, but I do believe he's happy with the results of this case. He's able to be back with his family. He's able to continue practicing law. So is this all frustrating? I'm sure it is, but I think that he's happy with where he is.
And ultimately, what do you think this means for the outcome of the 2020 election interference case based on the ruling today?
I don't think the ruling is going to affect it much, except this. I already did not believe that there was any chance this case would go to trial before November 2024. Now, particularly if Mr. Sadow and other defense lawyers file an appeal, there is absolutely no chance that this case is going to go to trial before November 2024, which I think a lot of people would say Donald Trump would probably view as a victory, even if he didn't win this particular motion.
All right, Scott Grubman, thank you so much for joining us. Anne-Marie and Vlad, back to you.
Hey, Nicole, thank you very much. All right, so we're going to continue our coverage of this breaking news out of Georgia that Fani Willis was not found to be
disqualifying.
Exactly.
Right. To serve in the role that she has in prosecuting former President Trump's election interference case.
But she's got a tough decision to make, and we're going to dig into that after the break.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
If China invades Taiwan, what will the U.S. Navy do?
Here in Tel Aviv, second siren in about 10 minutes.
This Humvee just pulled up and said, it's time to leave.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush. What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where. But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. See you on Primetime, streaming free everywhere.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely. As Taiwan faces threats and aggression.
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Fulton, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
Record-breaking storm surge and devastating wind.
every second counts.
The mud punched a hole right through the wall.
See, hear, feel the forecast. Tonight on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
All right, we are continuing to follow breaking news out of Georgia, where a judge has ruled Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis can continue to prosecute former President Trump's election interference case. We want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson for more analysis. So that's kind of like the top line, that she can continue. But, and there's a big but, Jessica. The judge said, though, there doesn't seem to be a conflict of interest in regards to the relationship that she had with Nathan Wade, who she hired onto the team. He did say, if there may not be a conflict of interest, but there may be an appearance of a conflict, and that's enough. So she has a tough decision to make. The judge said, either you go, Fani, or Nathan Willis goes.
Wade.
Well, and as we've been discussing throughout the morning, I suspect that that is not a difficult decision, that she, as the elected district attorney, as the head of this office, will say, it's me, I'm the one who stays. We can find a different special prosecutor. I mean, I think it's worth asking whether or not this should have happened before the ruling. But as you laid out, and as I'm going through the ruling again, very clear that the judge said not enough here for an actual conflict of interest. And what would you need for an actual conflict of interest? She would have to be receiving a financial benefit as a result of her decision to appoint Nathan Wade. And the judge is very clear here that it doesn't look like the motivating factor in saying, and I believe he was her third choice, Nathan Wade, you're the one who's going to help take on this case, that the motivating factor wasn't the romantic relationship or the financial gain. But the second half of this ruling, I have to say, is not good for Fani Willis. It is a rebuke of her judgment, and it is really a kind of love letter to the importance of the legitimacy of the judicial branch, the respect that people have for cases, not just criminal cases, but all cases where there's a question as to why it was brought or whether or not the prosecutor has any underlying motive here. So I don't think that this is a great day, frankly, for Fani Willis. You don't want language like this from a judge that forces you to make a decision. Now, could it have been worse? Absolutely. But I think people will look at this case and ask whether or not we ever needed to be here at all, whether or not we ever needed this delay. And let's remember what was viewed previously as maybe the strongest criminal case against the former president.
But does that change, Jessica, in terms of, I mean, you now know there's an art to selecting juries, and I wonder if you believe or you think that a jury will be able to keep these two sort of ideas separate from the case at hand, which is, did the former president and his allies attempt to overturn the election in Georgia? They interfere with the election in Georgia, regardless of what Fani Willis may have engaged in her personal life with someone on her team.
Absolutely. I have faith in the jury system. I have faith that jurors can do their job. And let's remember that this is a case where the jurors were always going to have some preconceived notions about the players, in the sense that show me a juror who has not heard of former President Trump or doesn't have a view of the events of January 6th. The goal isn't to find people who don't have any views or opinions on Fani Willis or the former president. The goal is to find people who can say, my job isn't to make a political judgment or a policy judgment. My job is to look at the facts alleged and look at the applicable law and make a determination. And I do still think that that is possible. Now, the unfortunate thing for people who wanted this case to proceed more quickly is that having this conversation about the disqualification, having the hearings, waiting for the ruling, all of it caused a delay. And Vlad and Anne-Marie, as we've said so many times, any delay is good for the former president because we're not on a legal calendar. We're on a legal calendar and an electoral calendar. And the further we push to November, I think the better it is for him. Anne-Marie and I were able to talk through the specifics of what would happen if Trump wins. Could this case continue? But in some, could the jury still do its job? Absolutely. I have faith that they can. And that's what this decision is about. This decision is about making sure that a jury can walk in and not have those kinds of questions.
But replacing Nathan Wade, I mean, how challenging could that be to find a new special prosecutor? I assume it's him and perhaps a team of other attorneys working with him or under him. So this is like a big kind of brick being removed from this wall, I would think.
It's a challenge. It's one that I would hope would be anticipated by the district attorney's office. This was a possible conclusion to come out of this disqualification hearing. So one would hope that there had been some pre-planning. Now, he is not the only attorney on this case. Obviously, he did have a big role. But I will say one thing you learn in the practice of law is that everybody is replaceable. We are all somewhat fungible. And I do have faith that they will be able to find somebody else. Now, will it take time to get somebody up to speed? Of course, but less time than disqualifying the entire district attorney's office.
And I would think also someone just willing to take this on because clearly your personal life and other things may come under scrutiny.
Right, 100%. Yeah, that's an excellent point, Jessica.
Well, that's right. I mean, we know why people decide who are qualified, who maybe have the time, decide not to take these cases. And that is a separate conversation about what we know happens to judges, to prosecutors, to court clerks, to court staff who are in any way involved in these cases. We know that they are subject to public ridicule. We know that their personal lives are put under the microscope. And we know that, frankly, I think they are subject to more public scrutiny than any public servant potentially should ever have to withstand. Having said that, I think there were, in this case, in my view, and in the view of Judge McAfee, in this case, there were errors in judgment. And I think that the case can proceed. And I, again, really hope that people understand this has nothing to do with the strength of the case against Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder that a number of the judges involved in cases related to Donald Trump have seen themselves sort of receiving all sorts of threats, whether it's on social media or directly sent to their offices, or all of that stuff is what you have to contend with when you take on one of these cases.
Indeed. And so ultimately, Jessica, how fast will this all happen? I mean, can we expect this afternoon for Fani Willis to say that Nathan Wade has been jettisoned from the case? Or is there some kind of timeline here? All right, we have just a few seconds left, Jessica. Yes or no? Do you think it's going to happen within the next 24 hours?
I don't.
Okay. All right. We're going to keep it as very succinct.
Yeah.
All right. We got a lot more news coming up ahead. We're going to break down everything happening in Georgia.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
What does that mean?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response? What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
This is CBS.
CBS News, 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
At the CBS Evening News, we focus on solutions, finding solutions to healthcare problems, how much money we can spend on groceries, finding solutions to help people understand what are the right choices to make for you.
It's 10 a.m. in Georgia, where we are following breaking news. Judge Scott McAfee has ruled Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis can continue to prosecute former President Trump's election interference case. But she has a choice to make. The judge tells Willis if she stays, Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade must go. Wade is the man with whom she had a romantic relationship with and hired to join the case. We want to bring in CBS News campaign reporter Katrina Kaufman and CBS News Justice Department reporter Robert Legary to break down the decision. Thank you both for joining us. Katrina, let's reset for the audience. What does this ruling mean for this election interference case?
It means that the case can move forward. Either the district attorney, Fani Willis, or special prosecutor Nathan Wade, who she had a relationship with, have to step away, though, because the judge says while he finds no actual conflict of interest here that would fully dismiss the prosecution's office or the charges, there's still an appearance of impropriety over this case that could really threaten the public perception of it. And the judge is really concerned about the integrity of the case, the integrity of the justice system, and his own integrity. I was struck by one thing he said on a radio program, I think it was a week ago, and he talked about how he has 2 children, and in the future, when he's talking to them about the cases that he presided over, he said, I want to look them in the eye and tell them that I played it straight and I did the best I could. And he really took this decision very seriously. This has almost become a trial within a trial, this trial about Fani Willis and Nathan Wade, but really the issue here is a very important election interference case against Donald Trump and the other defendants, and that now will be moving forward.
Yeah, so speaking of that, timing is significant here. Robert, could we see this case happen then before the November election? What's the likelihood?
I'm never one to engage in predictions like that, particularly in cases as complex as this. There are a lot of defendants, a lot of high-profile defendants, and some interesting, legal arguments that are still being made. The former president put out a statement today saying that they're going to proceed on legal grounds in this matter. So it remains to be seen whether or not this is the end of this specific question. Really, whether or not this goes to trial or not in November remains to be seen. I did want to make one point concurrent with what Katrina was talking about in terms of how the judge saw this in relation to the court itself. He says that, quote, when this danger goes uncorrected, so the danger that he sees of this potential impropriety, it undermines the legitimacy and moral force of our already weakest branch of government. And actually goes on to quote the Federalist Papers by saying that the judiciary's judgment will be obeyed only so long as the public respects it. And so that is, from the 1700s, he's going all the way back there to say that the judiciary's power comes not from the military, comes not from law enforcement officers, but from the public's respect of the institution itself. And so he is saying that this conflict of interest, or this perceived, conflict of interest directly undermines that. And so now he gives them that binary choice.
So, Katrina, we were speaking to Jessica Levinson earlier in the last hour, and we wanted to get a sense of the timing of what next steps are going to look like in the days and weeks ahead. Anne-Marie asked whether or not this case would be brought before a jury before the election. But what happens just in the immediate? What do you think will happen just in the immediate?
In the immediate, we're going to be looking for either Fani Willis or Nathan Wade to be stepping aside. I think it's a very clear choice that it should be Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade. And then also Trump's team has made it clear that they want to appeal this ruling. So I think that we will be seeing that very soon as well.
Earlier Nicole Killian was talking to an attorney for one of the defendants, and he mentioned something called an interlocutory appeal, which is an appeal in the middle of a case, which I had not heard of before. I assume that there's going to be an appeal, but I didn't think that you could appeal something before the case is done and over with. I don't know if either of you could speak to that as sort of a tool and how that might be used with this case.
I mean, we're already seeing that with the D.C. election interference case. This appeal that's going on with the issue of immunity is also an interlocutory appeal that's happening before the case has even gone to trial. So that's very possible we could see that with this case as well. It's clearly a strategy of former President Trump.
And Robert, no doubt you have perhaps already seen this statement from former President Trump's lawyers, which reads, in part, while respecting the court's decision, we believe that the court did not afford appropriate significance to the prosecutorial misconduct of Willis and Wade, including the financial benefits, testifying untruthfully about when their personal relationship began, as well as Willis's extrajudicial MLK church speech. But it would strike that most ordinary viewers who watched, because we ran the full testimonies of the case on CBS News and other outlets, that the public and the potential jury pool did get a good sense of whether or not there was prosecutorial misconduct, including those financial benefits, because they all talked about them. So is this just a way, because this is what they're paid to do, to release a statement that says that they disagree, obviously, with the ruling from the judge, but is there any validity at all, in your mind, to what they're suggesting here?
It's important to remember that when a jury is sat in a trial, right, they're looking at the strength of the evidence that the prosecutors bring, as well as the credibility of the prosecutors, and then the credibility of the defense and any arguments or holes that they can poke in the case. And so, as we know, prosecutors' goal are not to bring charges, but to get convictions on charges. And so that is what we see here underlying in this decision as well, and then what we see in the statement from the former president's attorneys. They know that the prosecutor's goal is to prosecute and to get a conviction. And so anything short of that is a loss for a prosecutor. And so, when a jury then has to sit and decide the credibility of evidence, the credibility of the people presenting the evidence on both sides. And so, I'm sure that when this case goes to trial, if this case goes to trial before the election, there will be questions about, did you watch this testimony? How aware you how aware of these allegations are you? And what is your opinion on them?
And we should remind people, I mean, this particular case is so far from the central argument here. The primary case that we are talking about is an election interference case. This is so far removed from it. Katrina, can we just sort of remind people what the central case is and what the arguments were about Fani Willis and her relationship with Nathan Wade?
Of course. I mean, the central case here is about Trump and originally 18 co-defendants interfering with the 2020 election in Georgia. The issue with Fani Willis and Nathan Wade is that one of the defendants accused them of having a romantic relationship. And the bigger issue was they said that Fani Willis financially benefited from that relationship, that she hired Nathan Wade as a special prosecutor on this team, and that he took her on extravagant vacations, spent state money on her, and as a result, both of them have a vested financial interest in this trial and making it a sprawling racketeering case, in prosecuting it against so many defendants and in moving it forward. And that was really what they said was the issue here.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, Robert Legary, thank you so much, guys, for jumping in there, reading those documents so quickly and digesting it for us. Thank you. So joining us now is CBS News political director Fin Gomez. All right, Fin, you know, we've been talking all morning long about the court calendar, but as Katrina, I think it was Katrina or Jessica pointed out, there's also a political calendar that is impacted by this. You know, what does this decision mean for the Trump campaign?
You know, speaking of sources within Trump world, they tell me that there was definitely disappointment. They were expecting the Fani Willis to be taken off the case. However, they also say that it plays into the narrative, they say, of this political witch hunt that the former president is facing. But also speaking to Biden sources, Biden campaign sources, they tell me this shows that this is emphasizes that there are huge warning signs for the former president in Georgia. A reminder to you and to all those watching, of course, Georgia is a key battleground state in this year's presidential election. You know, and just this past week, Anne-Marie, we saw the Republican GOP primary, the Republican presidential primary, excuse me, where we saw Nikki Haley, who had dropped out of the race, you know, days before, Haley netted 77,000 votes. This was in 2020 in that general election, and the crux of this case, that race, the election was decided in Georgia by less than 12,000 votes. So according to my Biden sources, they say this is a big warning sign for the former president's chances in this key battleground state.
So have they responded other than the statement that I read earlier, Finn? Have we heard from the former president himself?
Not yet. There is an expectation that he will go to his typical venue of airing his statements and grievances, and that is his social media platform on Truth Social. That is still expected, but right now they are pointing to the statement offered by his lawyer in Georgia, Stephen Sadow, and essentially that is where it lies as of now. And so we are seeing how this will impact this race. We did have a recent poll, that came out just this week from CBS News, that showed that this is a very tight race in Georgia, in the Peach State. We're looking at 51 to 48, 51 for the former President Trump, and 48 for President Biden, which just shows again how crucial, how tight this race is in this battleground state of Georgia.
And so I guess it's we can expect that the former president is going to be folding this into his campaign. If there hasn't been a fundraising email sent out yet, I mean, as much as he sort of talks about how these are all legal witch hunts, he certainly seems to take full advantage of any opportunity to get in front of a courtroom if there's a camera rolling.
Absolutely, and I think and it also shows like the uniqueness of this race. You know, we've been saying this for months. But this is like we are in uncharted waters here. You know, like we are in a place in American history that we have not seen before. Just this yesterday, the split screen of President Biden being in the two other battleground states, including Wisconsin, and you know, Trump being in Florida at a court hearing there. I mean, it just shows like how this year's cycle, how the path to the White House runs through the courthouse. And it's we have never been here before. It is a complete a complete aberration, frankly, of previous cycles.
All right, Finn, thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.
So people surrounding the Georgia election interference case are reacting to today's decision, including former counsel for Kenneth Chesebro. Chesebro pleaded guilty to a conspiracy to commit filing false documents charged last October. Our Nicole Killian spoke to his former attorney earlier this morning.
Fani Willis, in my opinion, has continued to show, at minimum, horrible judgment. And yeah, the judge has now called her out on it, but so what?
I mean, do you see this as a slap on the wrist?
It's not even a slap on the wrist. You know, it's a rub on the finger, whatever the analogy is. It's not, I don't think she's going to care whatsoever, because here's the thing. If you're okay as the elected district attorney with going into court, taking an oath to tell the truth, and then perjuring yourself, you're not really going to care at the end of the day if the judge gives you, let's call it a little slap on the wrist.
All right, we're following all the latest updates on Donald Trump's legal cases, from the latest ruling in Georgia to his cases in Florida and New York. Our political panel will join us next for an update. Stay with us.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
If China invades Taiwan, what will the U.S. Navy do?
Here in Tel Aviv, second siren in about 10 minutes.
This Humvee just pulled up and said, it's time to leave.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where. But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. See you on Prime Time, streaming free everywhere.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Fulton, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
Record-breaking storm surge and devastating wind.
Every second counts.
The mud punched a hole right through the wall.
See, hear, feel the forecast. Tonight on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
All right, we are continuing to follow breaking news out of Georgia. A judge has ruled Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis can continue to prosecute former President Trump's election interference case if special prosecutor Nathan Wade withdraws. Now, Wade is the man with whom she had a romantic relationship with and who she hired to join the case.
Our political panel is here with us now. Terry Sullivan served as the campaign manager for Marco Rubio in 2016 and is a CBS News political contributor. Joel Payne is a CBS News political contributor, Democratic strategist, and chief communications officer for Move On. All right, Terry, let's sort of take a macro view here. It's been a very busy week for the former president as in terms of his legal cases. We've discussed how he tends to see a surge of support following legal challenges. And yet, part of the appeal, I guess, to his supporters is that he consistently seeks to undermine our judiciary, especially when it comes to his own cases. So how do you anticipate this latest ruling with regards to Fani Willis will impact the campaign? I mean, is this a fundraiser for him?
Yeah, look, I think Fani Willis this might be an in-kind contribution from her to his campaign. I mean, here we are talking about how a judge is kicking at least one of the prosecutors off of his case for, at a minimum, the appearance of misconduct. And he intimates in his ruling that he doesn't believe that they were even telling the truth under oath. And so I think that's this is another example of how Donald Trump is often lucky that his opponents make foolish mistakes like this. If this was a well-prosecuted case, we wouldn't be spending time talking about how how the prosecutors might be unethical. And so this is a fundraising opportunity for Donald Trump, and it's a huge misstep for the prosecutor and her case.
So, Joel, in regards to sort of the politics of it all, certainly there are many Republicans that believe that Donald Trump's legal challenges are politically motivated. But there are also a number of Republicans that believe, even if they are politically motivated, this is a distraction, this is a weakness, and they're sort of growing wary of it. President Biden's approach has thus far been to not comment on these legal challenges at all. But is there a way for him to take advantage, benefit, use this politically moving forward?
I'm sure there is a way, and I'm sure the Biden folks are thinking about that. I think what's a challenge there, Anne-Marie, is that this is the president, right? He is a candidate, but he is also the acting president, which means he oversees the Justice Department, which is not necessarily, this is obviously a Georgia case, but I think that this president has been pretty clear that he wants to have a red line between, someone like him as an office holder and those who are prosecuting a case. And so I think that's going to have to coexist in some way. Joe Biden's going to have to find a way to be clear about where he stands on what Donald Trump is accused of without being seen as interfering in the case. That's difficult. I don't think the president's team has arrived at how to do that yet, but I think that'll be a challenge for them. But listen, and I tend to agree with Terry. There are certainly some mistakes that were made by DA Willis here, but none of what we're talking about fundamentally changes the underlying facts of the case. We all know, based on what we all saw with our own eyes, what we listened to, the evidence that's been out in the public domain, what Donald Trump is accused of, asking the Secretary of State of Georgia to find a number of votes so that he could beat Joe Biden in 2020, even though it was clear that he lost. And more importantly than myself or Terry, the people of Georgia know. And to Finn's point from his previous segment that he joined you with, I think a lot of Georgia voters are going to be watching this. This is no longer just a testing ground of the Republican primary. This is now a general electorate, and that's more difficult for Donald Trump.
So, Terry, to the point that Joel is making there, I mean, just away from the decision, the judge ruling on whether this was actually impropriety between Fani Willis and Nathan Wade, how do you see this Georgia case? I mean, do you think that the former president engaged in an attempt to undermine the election in Georgia?
Look, it's boring when I always agree with Joel, but I usually do. Look, this is a case that should have been, very unhelpful at a minimum, politically speaking.
Right, because both Terry, you and Joel know, not to interrupt you, but you both know that up until this moment, everybody was saying if there's going to be anything that
any of these legal challenges,
it's this one in Georgia. So kind of like suggesting that it was sort of a slam dunk.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not on the jury. I don't know all the facts of the case, but it sure didn't look very promising for Donald Trump as a case. And the appearance was terrible at an absolute minimum. But the reality is, they screwed up and dropped the ball. And now there's this huge distraction. So it really puts doubt on this case that helps Trump. So from the immediate ruling of what has happened here, this is a win for Donald Trump. And what most legal folks said was his toughest case. And he's got a win here today off of this.
Joel, I want to pivot over to some of the other things that happened this week on the campaign trail. As you know, Vice President Kamala Harris visited an abortion clinic in Minnesota. The Vice President's office said it's the first time a Vice President or a president has ever visited a clinic like this. It's clear that the administration is leaning into very hard the question of abortion. I got to admit, I felt like earlier on in this sort of campaign season that this may not be an issue that would move people to the ballot box, but I think after Alabama and the IVF conversation popped up, maybe it is. Can we talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in the polls, what voters seem to be thinking and saying when it comes to the abortion issue?
Look, I think that what we've all seen, whether it's our CBS polls or other public polls, is that the issue that's a big driver that moves people, particularly on the Democratic side, is abortion, is the threat to abortion rights. By the way, it's not just the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade 2 years ago now. It's also the threat to mifepristone, which is the abortion pill that's available to so many Americans. It's the threat to IVF. Vis-a-vis the Alabama case. So this is a front and center issue, top of mind for many Americans, including American women. And I think that Vice President Harris going to this abortion clinic, I think just demonstrates that the issue is seen. I think representation matters so much. And one thing that Vice President Harris can do is show these people that are concerned about this issue that it's top of mind for her. So I just think being there sometimes matters, and it keeps the issue top of mind for voters. And I'm sure that that's what the Biden campaign is trying to do. And I think they'll continue to do, and I think they'll continue to lean into Kamala Harris as a leading voice in the pushback against the Republican attack on abortion rights.
So, Terry, is that going to be tough for Republicans? Because it seems like they haven't really found their footing in terms of what they are saying about abortion.
Politically speaking, it's a tougher issue for Republicans, but it's the only issue that Joe Biden can really lean into where he's got the advantage on. It's tough for him to talk about the border security, which Americans care more about. It's tough for him, at least in the polling data. It's tough for him to talk about the economy and inflation, which voters in the polling care more about. So, I mean, he's going to lean into this issue because this is the one issue that, from a polling standpoint, he seems to be stronger on.
All right, Terry, Joel, thank you very much. All right, so we're going to go back to this morning's Georgia ruling. Joining us now is CBS News investigative producer Daniel Klaidman. Did I say your name properly?
Klaidman. But you're really close.
No, I was just about to be like, no, I'm not saying it right. But I'm glad you're here, Daniel. You've been following you've been following the whole trial. And we know that you have a number of sources inside the DA's office. So what have you learned? What's the reaction been? What's going on?
Well, look, I have not spoken to them since this decision came out because I can guarantee you they are sitting in a room, they are studying and analyzing every word of this decision before they decide to make any public comments or talk about it at all. And of course, they have a decision to make, which is what happens to Nathan Wade, the special prosecutor who was romantically involved with Fani Willis. I think we know that that is not a difficult choice for them. I think it is pretty clear that he will be gone, will be removed from the case. How they do this is I don't know for sure. They may want to let him do it with some dignity, step aside himself. But he will be gone, and Fani Willis will move on as not only the district attorney overseeing this case, but my prediction is Fani Willis will be in the courtroom in this case. She will try significant pieces of this case. She is the most talented trial lawyer in that office, and she has some work to do to rehabilitate her reputation. And my gut tells me that the way she will do this is not by going out and giving a lot of press conferences, but by doing it in the courtroom.
Right. So one of the things that was a key contention of the defense was that Fani Willis had a financial interest in extending this case because her romantic partner was brought into it. But here's what Judge McAfee said in rejecting that notion. I'm going to quote it here. The district attorney has not in any way acted in conformance with the theory that she arranged a financial scheme to enrich herself. That's but there are other things that he did call her out on. And I wonder if you can break that down for us.
First of all, I'm glad you read that because I think from the very beginning it was clear to a lot of legal experts that that theory was really strained. The idea that she entered into a corrupt bargain with Nathan Wade and to drag out this case
for money,
for money so that she could go on
dates. Go
on a bunch of dates seemed sort of absurd. But the judge is very tough on her. And some of the language, which I jotted down, he calls out her tremendous lapse in judgment, her unprofessional manner of testimony during these hearings.
On one hand, I'm trying to understand, Daniel, because we all watched it, and I just thought to myself, on something so high profile, I get it. You feel like you're being unfairly maligned. You feel like you, as a black woman, are not getting a fair shake. But then why go in and give people more ammunition, for lack of a better word, to use against you by approaching it in the way that she did? By, the comment about vodka, I don't drink wine, I drink vodka. All these sort of weird asides.
Because that is Fani Willis. And I spent a lot of time in the course of reporting a book with my colleague Mike Isikoff, Find Me the Votes, on this case. We interviewed her half a dozen times, and we saw that side to her. And she can be fiery. She is a force of nature. She is strategic and smart, but there's also a touch of arrogance in Fani Willis. The kind of thing that you sometimes see in trial lawyers of her caliber. So that is Fani Willis. She is not going to change. I think she is going to get her house in order after all of this. And at this point, she's going to have to be Caesar's wife. She's going to have to be above reproach. She can't make any mistakes. But in terms of some of the things that the judge said, I think the thing that really stood out for me is at one point he used this devastating phrase. He talked about how an odor of mendacity remains around this case. And that is a sort of indirect way of saying, were people lying under oath in this case? And was Fani Willis perhaps not truthful? And then at one point he talks about, at the end of the day, I don't have to make all of these credibility calls to make my decision here. But there are other institutions and organizations out there that can look into this. She talked about the bar. She talked about the various ethics committees. So some of those questions are still going to be lingering, and Fani Willis is going to have to continue to battle to rehabilitate herself.
Dan, just really quickly, a part of the criticism was that Nathan Wade wasn't experienced enough to take this position as special prosecutor. But Fani Willis had looked for a while to find someone willing to take this job and was turned down a couple of times. How hard is it going to be to find a replacement?
Look, I think that the District Attorney's Office has realized that this day might be coming and that Nathan Wade likely was going to be leaving. So I think they have a plan in place, whether it's to bring someone from the outside who's already come in or someone who's already been on the team. And there are a number of very talented trial lawyers on their team already. So one point on that, which is that Nathan Wade was never going to be the lead trial lawyer in this case. His skill was as a behind-the-scenes player, as a manager and organizer of the case. He ran the grand jury process. By all accounts, he did it extremely well. And the idea that he was the lead of this case, which meant that he was going to be in the courtroom trying it, that was never going to actually happen.
So, but I do, one last question, I guess, and it's like when you are a kid, your parents tell you should be a lawyer because lawyers make a lot of money, right? And you know the law, and so you can use it. It struck me that the more than $750,000 that Nathan Wade had earned, I thought to myself, these are public officials. That sounds more to me like corporate lawyer money, but maybe not. I have no idea how.
That's actually below the going rate.
Is that 750 grand?
It's over 2.5 years, whatever it was.
Yeah.
$250 an hour.
That's low.
That is not a lot of money for what lawyers can make in private practice. And if you feel like you have to bring in someone from private practice, you've got to pay that much. And the fact of the matter is, he testified, and I think there was evidence to support this, that he did more work than he actually billed for because there was a cap on what he could bill.
Yeah, I think he could only bill for, is it 40 or 60 hours a week or whatever?
60, I think it was.
Right, exactly, yeah. So
fascinating, really interesting. Daniel Kleidman, great to have you. Welcome to CBS News.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's really great for us. All right, we're going to have much more on this story throughout the day, but as we've been discussing earlier, Anne-Marie made this point. Vice President Harris made a historic visit to an abortion clinic as reproductive rights take center stage in the 2024 presidential campaign. We'll have details on that and much more news after the break. Stay with us.
faces, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go